Good afternoon, everyone. I know this is probably not the best time to attend a training, but we do appreciate you taking the time and being here this afternoon. Hopefully you will find this training to be educational and helpful and keep you engaged to not let you fall asleep. Before we begin, I do want to thank all those who have taken the time and effort in putting this training together. As you can see from the topics on the agenda, this has been a true team effort. I do believe that software purchase is a cross-functional process, and we could not do it alone from the procurement or the purchasing aspect. So the only way for us to streamline and improve this process is through collaboration and teamwork. And you will see that throughout this presentation, how this has been a true collaborative effort. As you can tell, in today's day and age, buying a software is no longer a simple process. In most instances, there could be somewhere you could buy it without any issues. But in general, with the advancement of technology and cloud computing, the sophistication and complexity has also increased. And you will see why as we go through this today's training. We hope this training will give you and everyone an insight and an idea of what all goes into buying software and why it is important that we work collaboratively to make the software purchasing process as smooth, efficient, and painless as possible. Here are the topics that we will cover in today's training. The new purchasing process and all the elements pertaining to software purchase, like data security, which is covered with Appendix DS, the privacy and accessibility issues that we run into when buying a software. So please hang in there, enjoy the training, and hope you will find it insightful. I would like to now introduce April Sather, Assistant Chief Information Security Officer, who has been instrumental actually in leading this effort. And we are thankful to have her partnership in this whole process, and has been an excellent partner in developing this new process. So April, take it from here.
Thank you, Snehal. Today, in addition to learning about the new process, you will be meeting and hearing from the people involved in creating and delivering it. We also wanted to take this opportunity to communicate the why behind each part of the process. I think we can all see from the number of well-publicized incidents that the frequency and scale of data breaches continues to grow dramatically. And in parallel, there has been a significant shift in public opinion and the value that people are placing on privacy. Students, faculty, staff, donors, researchers, everyone is really looking to us to protect their privacy and to secure the data entrusted to us. So what we're doing by following this process is really the right thing. And in addition, we're ensuring accessibility is a further example of this. Our existing previous software procurement process was starting to crack under the pressure of a few kind of seismic changes. And the most significant one is the one I will touch on right now, and that is the explosion of cloud computing and its popularity across the campus. We find that it's fantastic that UCI is able to benefit from the best of breed solutions with really minimal investment. That would have been compared to what it would have cost us just a few years ago to try to do this on our own. So there's clearly a benefit to these cloud applications. However, in exchange, we do need to do more due diligence upfront to make sure that the partners in the software applications that we're entering into agreements with are the right fit for UCI and our privacy, security, and accessibility requirements. In fact, last year, an audit surfaced several opportunities for us to improve our governance over cloud computing and was another catalyst for this effort. We looked to apply several guiding principles throughout to keep us centered on what mattered most. Number one was customer centricity. We focused on creating what we believe, and we look to you for feedback on, is a simple, consistent experience, and one that ideally is going to reduce the end-to-end cycle time. This is really enabled by asking the right questions up front, gathering the right documentation early, and really making sure we have all that information in the process to avoid delays later. Teamwork, Snehal already alluded to. We have OIT, both security and accessibility teams, privacy, and of course, procurement involved. And I think that really does help us reduce any blind spots in the process as we're all really working through it together. Communication. So today's training is one example. We want to make sure that campus stakeholders are aware of the process and feeling confident about it and really understand it. But also we recognize that there might be needs for a one-on-one training, team training. This is really just the beginning, and we are really here for you as we all move forward and embrace this new process together. And finally, and very importantly, is risk reduction is another guiding principle, making sure that what we're doing is reducing risk for the campus. So what all of this is actually going to be doing is paving the way for a great new campus-facing resource, and that is a list of approved software. So software that's already gone through this process, has been looked at from security, privacy, and accessibility, and is going to be much easier and faster to procure. And I think we do hope that you find that very valuable. We expect to have that in place no later than the end of 2020. So with that, I think it's time to get started, and I hope you enjoy the presentation. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Patrick Coe and I'm one of the Senior Buyers and Procurement Services. I handle primarily the IT commodities on campus, which can include software, hardware, equipment financing, IT related services, telecommunications, and also audiovisual. Today I will be going over the new software procurement process, but before I begin, I wanted to take a brief moment to review how software has been purchased in the past and currently. In the past, requesters would submit their orders to their unit or department. At that point, the department would either purchase the software directly or route to procurement services / central procurement to process. Back in the day, this could easily be a 1 to 2 day turnaround time. The issue we have today is that the majority of the software we purchase are not physical software. Just from a show of hands, how many people here have actually seen or know what a floppy disk is? Probably not many of you. As many of you know, much of the software we purchase today has an element of cloud computing to it. In many situations, the software may have access to UCI's network or collect and store data in the cloud. In order to protect the university, we need to perform additional reviews and vet suppliers in order to help evaluate and mitigate any risks involved with data breaches or misappropriation of our institutional data. For many of you who are wondering why purchasing software takes as long as it does, let's look at our current software procurement process. I've broken this down into 3 sections. The first being the request phase. Typically in the request phase, the end user submits a request to departments, who then submits a KFS requisition or pays via PAL card. Once the requisition gets approved and assigned a PO number, it gets routed back to procurement services. During the step, we check our internal records and KFS to see if there are any existing agreements in place or any historical notes related to previous purchases. If there aren't any, we ask the department to fill out the software questionnaire to better help us understand what the software is and what type of data is being shared, and also if the software is accessible. We typically ask this for all software purchase requests simply because we are not the subject matter experts when it comes to each particular software being purchased. The department then goes back to the requester to fill out the questionnaire, and it gets routed back to procurement. As you can see, with all the back and forth between the requester, department, and procurement, this could easily take 1 to 2 weeks. In the review phase, procurement services reviews the questionnaire and then routes it to OIT and accessibility for review. If that's not needed, we issue a purchase order. During the security review, OIT will typically ask for additional documentation from the supplier to assist in performing the review and also assist with drafting the appendix data security with the department. The department then sends the UC contract templates and appendices for the supplier to review. Once the request documents have been returned, OIT then completes their review, and the contracts team reviews any edits and negotiates contracts language with the supplier. This step can easily take 2 to 6 weeks, since these steps are done one right after the other. Once the agreement is finalized, the contract is routed for signatures via DocuSign. Once completed, the PO is issued or paid via PAL card. The purchase process still only takes 1 or 2 days. Before I go into the new software procurement process, I wanted to discuss at a high level a few of the roles most of you may not be familiar with in this new process. First, we have the requester, and this person is typically a faculty member, researcher, student worker, staff member, or possibly another workforce member. The requester should be able to understand use cases and confirm that the requested software application meets their business requirements. They should also be able to identify the protection and availability levels of institutional information that will be stored, accessed, or transmitted through the software solution. Second, we have the unit procurement point of contact. This individual is considered the subject matter expert in the software procurement process for their unit. This role will assist the requester and in the execution of their responsibilities. This role is typically the departmental buyer or the individual that interacts directly with OIT and procurement services on their request. Third, we have what we call the Unit Information Security Lead, or short USIL. Each unit, both administrative and academic, have 2 USILs in their area. If you don't know who your USILs are, they're available on the OIT security website. These individuals are accountable for information security within their units and for holding third-party suppliers accountable for protecting institutional information and information resources. The USIL serves as a primary unit subject matter expert for information security questions, including those related to software procurement and post-procurement security and governance. They also serve as the main point of contact with the Chief Information Security Officer. Fourth, we have the OIT Security Risk and Compliance Team that conducts the supplier security risk reviews and negotiates the appendix data security with the supplier. Many of you may be unfamiliar with this group. The IT security team is separated between main campus and UCI Health. In one of the upcoming slides, we will go over which team you will need to engage with your requests. Fifth, we have procurement services, who establishes procurement and purchasing practices and strategically vets and negotiates contracts for goods and services, including software purchases. For those of you who do not know who in procurement handles software requests, you can see them on the screen. But for the most part, generally, if you have any questions, I am typically the point of contact in procurement. Not covered in these slides are also additional stakeholders that may have a role in this process. Since this is a high-level overview, you can learn more about these roles and responsibilities on the procurement website. Now on to the new software procurement process. As all of you can see, in comparison between the old process and the new process, the lead time is significantly reduced, and that is one of our hopes. Also, our attempt is to streamline the process, be in compliance with IS3, and also provide better visibility for departments. In theory, what originally took 3 to 8 weeks can be further delayed to 1 day to 4 weeks, depending on the particular software. In the request phase, the requester completes the new software procurement questionnaire and submits it to the Unit procurement point of contact for review. This questionnaire may be familiar to some of you as we've been using this for the past few months. Also in the past, there have been other iterations of this document. We ask that you fill this form out completely and accurately. If the requesters need assistance, they can reach out to the unit procurement point of contact. Please keep in mind this document is static and is subject to change. If you have any suggestions or feedback, we would love to get your input. Within this document, we ask that the requester provide the name of the software, their website link, and the main use of the software. We also ask that you identify whether the software is installed locally, in the cloud, or both. The next question asks that you identify if this purchase is new or if it is a renewal. This will help in later steps. In the body of the questionnaire, you'll be asked a series of questions related to whether or not the supplier has access to the UCI network, if PCI is involved, whether or not the misuse of the software could potentially harm life or property, and also if the software is used to collect, store, access, or transmit any sensitive data. If it does, we ask that you check the appropriate radio buttons and provide additional details in the notes sections to describe what that data is. At the bottom of the form, we also have 3 accessibility questions that will also need to be answered, and depending on how it's answered, it may or may not trigger an accessibility review. This form, for those who have not seen it, can be located on the procurement website under the procurement tab and under buying goods. Please be sure to fill out the questionnaire completely and accurately. Filling out the form incorrectly could potentially route it through the wrong process and delay your purchase. In the next step, the software procurement questionnaire is reviewed by the unit procurement point of contact. If the renewal box is checked, the unit procurement point of contact verifies if there are any existing agreements or if an agreement was not needed in prior years. Currently, we do not have a full inventory list of existing agreements, but we hope to have this later this year. In coordination with the Unit Information Security Lead, the Unit Procurement Point of Contact determines if the purchase requires a contract with any appendices, namely data security, GDPR, or BAA, and also if a further review is needed by the OIT security team. If the data is determined to be P1 or P2, the UCI will make this determination. The purchasing agreement template, along with appendices, can be found on the procurement website under the Contracts tab. In situations where no further review is needed and the purchase is low risk and low dollar, the purchase can be made via PO or PAL card. Please keep in mind that just because a piece of software is low dollar, this does not mean it is also low risk. Moving forward, the unit procurement point of contact and requester will need to complete the Appendix DS Exhibit 1. Based on the protection level, this will determine the level of cybersecurity insurance the supplier is required to carry. In addition, the data elements selected in Section 2 will determine if any of the other appendices, such as GDPR or BAA, will be required. Next, the unit procurement point of contact sends draft copies of the UCI purchasing agreement template, UCI terms and conditions, and any applicable appendices to the supplier for review. In addition, they will need the supplier to provide their information security plan or policy, along with a third-party security review, such as a SOC Type 2 report and a HECVAT self-assessment. The HECVAT is a vendor assessment tool that was created by the Higher Education Information Security Council and is widely used across the nation. Once those documents have been reviewed and returned, the unit procurement point of contact will forward the revised and redline contract documents to procurement services for review. If this is going to be paid via PO, we ask that departments submit a requisition in KFS. In addition to the step, the unit procurement point of contact forwards the software procurement questionnaire and also the supplier security documents to OIT, their security team for review. If there is any HIPAA data involved, it will need to be routed through the UCI health team for review. If it doesn't contain HIPAA, this will need to be routed through the main campus team. In order to begin the review process by OIT, requests will need to be submitted to one of these email addresses. On the main campus side, a ServiceNow ticket will be created when you submit your request via email to securityreviews@uci.edu. In addition, depending on the software, there may be additional review by privacy, accessibility, or PCI. Likewise, the UCI Health side also has a team that will perform similar reviews. During the review process, there may be exceptions to any of these reviews. This triggers the exception process and related escalations. There is a defined escalation process for various types of exceptions based on the nature of the issue. This process ultimately involves identifying the appropriate party who is willing and able to accept the risk. This is usually a unit head or a vice chancellor. If there are no exceptions or the exceptions have been resolved, the software procurement process continues. While the security review process is ongoing, the procurement services team will review and negotiate any red lines or changes to the contract language in parallel. By running these two steps in parallel, we're able to reduce the lead time in this phase. This step can vary in time depending on the complexity of the software and the agreement. Much of the time is spent waiting for suppliers' legal team to review and make edits to the agreements, or many times we're waiting on the vendor to provide the additional documentation needed by OIT. In addition, other departments may need to get involved in the process, such as privacy, risk management, or even campus council. Once the security review and contracts negotiations have concluded, the contracts team will finalize the agreement and route for signatures via DocuSign. Once the agreement is fully executed, we can issue the purchase order or pay via PAL card. At the end of this process, the software will be added to the university's inventory so that others can see what software agreements we have in place. We hope to have this available later. In closing, I wanted to provide 3 best practices for the requesters and the unit procurement points of contact. For the requester, number 1, we ask that you please submit your request as early as possible. Depending on the complexity of your request and available resources, this may take additional time to review. Number 2, we ask that you please consult with your unit procurement point of contact first with your request, and also be sure to fill out the software procurement questionnaire completely and accurately, as this could delay the process if filled out incorrectly. Number 3, this is very important. We ask that you never sign any supplier terms and conditions or agreements on behalf of the university. This also includes any click-through agreements. Most people on campus do not have the authority to sign agreements, and they may be agreeing to unfavorable terms and conditions on behalf of the university. If any signatures are required by the department, procurement services will route the documents via DocuSign. For the unit procurement point of contact, number 1, we ask that you check for existing agreements. Time and effort can be reduced if an existing agreement is already in place with the supplier, either locally or at the system-wide level. We hope to provide this later this year, but in case there is one you cannot locate, you can always contact procurement services. We also ask that you verify that this purchase is in compliance with BUS 43 and the Public Contract Code. For more information on this, you can always visit the procurement website. Number 2, we ask that you assist and verify that the software procurement questionnaire is filled out accurately and completely. If this is filled out incorrectly, it could route through the incorrect workflow. And third, lastly, please allow sufficient time for the software review. There are certain times when OIT and procurement services are inundated with software requests, and this is usually during fiscal year end. In these times, I would recommend submitting your request as early as possible. Unless we are notified that the request is urgent, priority is typically given to requisitions submitted before the year-end cutoff date. This concludes my overview of the software review process. Thank you.
Hi, my name is John Danoon, and I'm the Security Risk and Compliance Program Manager here at UCI, and I'm part of the OIT security team. And today we'll be talking about security reviews and Appendix DS. So the first question is, why do we have Appendix DS in the first place? And that's really our primary contractual tool to make sure that UC data and systems are kept secure whenever we're sharing information or providing access to third parties. And primarily that is usually cloud services, software as a service out into the cloud, that sort of thing. But it can also apply to any consultants that we might hire, or even service and maintenance contracts of people coming onto campus and performing IT services for us. Appendix DS really applies to all data, not just toxic data. That is a common misunderstanding. We really want any data that we share with a third party to be kept secure. Even something relatively benign like email addresses, we don't want to have those abused. Consider, for example, that we might have a contract with a third party to send out an email announcement to all of our students or something along those lines. We don't want that third party to resell those email addresses to marketers that might impact our students. So we really want all data protected contractually. We want all services that we might engage, anything from free services all the way up to multi-million-dollar purchases, to be covered. And in fact, free services can really be the most dangerous out there, because they also make a lot of their money by reselling information or doing things that UC may not approve of. It's all purchase modes, from PAL cards to purchase orders, so really everything is potentially covered by Appendix DS. One clarification is this does not apply to software that's only installed and used locally. It needs to have some third-party or cloud component to be covered by DS, although this line can be blurry from time to time because some software does have cloud components, but that'll have to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. But in general, third-party risk is something that is really important to UC, because we have no control of our data once it's been given to a third party, and we really need to have some contractual assurance that that data is going to be kept secure to UC standards. So what are the components of Appendix DS? There are three sections to it. The first is the contract terms, where we have a purpose and introduction, we have a glossary of definitions, and then there are 9 articles that set out the requirements of Appendix DS. There's Exhibit 1, and this needs to be filled out by the unit making the purchase. This is really intended to define what kind of data will be part of this contract, and that's really important to be able to inform the supplier of the type of data that is going to be part of the contract, so they really understand what their requirements are, both from a data and a legal perspective, for protecting this data. And lastly, there's an Exhibit 2, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but that's the supplier's initial security plan that they returned back to UCI. So Appendix DS requirements in a nutshell. You'll notice that I started the numbering at 3, and that's to correspond with starting with the 3rd article in Appendix DS. But these are the 9 articles that are really basic, straightforward protections that we want to have in the data security appendix. Number 1 is we want the supplier to agree to protect our data and not sell it for other purposes without our permission. That seems pretty basic. Number 4 is they need to have a documented security plan that we can evaluate, and that helps us judge how mature they are at protecting data and whether they have secure processes in place to protect that data. Article 5 talks about having some sort of evidence that they're actually following their own security plan. Typically, this is a third-party assessment or audit, and a SOC 2 type SOC Type 2 report is kind of the gold standard, but there are other documents that we can work with as well. Article 6 is we really want them to tell us when they make changes to their security plan. Most critically is if they do anything to decrease the security that they previously agreed to, and we really want to be able to be aware of that in case we need to change the terms of the contract or renegotiate the contract. Number 7 is when the contract ends, we want them to either return our data to us in some format or destroy it as appropriate and not hang on to it and have our data sitting out there somewhere. Number 8 is we want them to tell us if there are ever any subpoenas or legal requests for our data. They may not always be able to share that information with us, but if they have that ability, we want to know about it. Number 9 is one of the biggest components of Appendix DS, and we really need the supplier to let us know if any of our data has ever been breached. And if it has, let us know, work with us to find out root cause and what happened and how better to protect it in the future. And we want the supplier to bear any costs, either for notification or other security costs, if it is determined that they are responsible for the data breach. And a data breach is something that's significant enough that we have an out clause in the contract, and we can terminate the contract based on a breach if we so desire. Article 10 is the supplier agrees not to install any backdoors or any other illicit code into our software or systems. And Article 11 is they agree to perform background checks as appropriate on any employee that has access to our data or systems. Exhibit 1 is basically the exhibit that the requesting unit needs to fill out, and it consists of 3 sections. The first is on the protection level, which in turn sets the cyber insurance requirements in the terms and conditions document, so it's really important to have that noted here. Probably won't mean a lot to a supplier because the protection levels are an internal UCI construct, but it's also useful for the security team when we're doing an evaluation to really understand the type of data that's being included in the contract. Section 2 is the data element descriptors, and that basically is a bunch of boxes that help describe what kind of data is this. And we've pre-populated that with a lot of common data types that are used at the university, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And then lastly, kind of tied to the types of data in Section 2, Section 3 specifically lists any laws, regulations, or contract requirements that are needed to protect that data. And that's really important to tell a supplier so they really know what their responsibilities are if they accept this data and work with us on this contract. And it also helps determine from a UCI security standpoint how we evaluate the compliance of this contract and the security maturity of the supplier, because we have some flexibility in the depth of analysis that we do when we look at a security plan. And if the data is low risk, we might have a lighter touch when we do a security analysis on the security plan, whereas if there are some really high security requirements like PCI or HIPAA, we're going to have to really look in detail and have a strict interpretation of a lot of the requirements. So protection levels in Exhibit 1. So if you have any questions about what that means, there are a couple of URLs here at the bottom. The first one is a UCI site where we talk about all the protection levels and what they are. The second URL is a similar information at UCOP. So refer to those guidance if you need to have more information on protection levels. Protection level 1 is basically low-level public information, and all the way up to protection level 4, which is really toxic, regulated information like social security numbers or credit card numbers, medical information, that sort of thing. If you need some help trying to determine protection level, we have a classification decision tree available from the UCI site that kind of walks you through a bunch of questions to help you determine what possible protection level your data might have. And then, even though it's listed as optional on the Exhibit 1, please provide a short description on what your data is and how it's used. And that helps not only the supplier, but also the security team better understand what kind of data is involved in this potential contract. So Section 2 of Exhibit 1 lists a whole bunch of different types of data here. It's kind of daunting to look at this list. It's alphabetized, but quite honestly, many of these really aren't used that often. So I'm going to go through some of the common ones in a little more detail here. The first ones are the personally identifiable information. This is going to be part of almost every contract because there's just a lot of PII in a lot of the data that we share with third parties. It can be anywhere from P1 to P4. It's a very broad legal definition, so it is basically anything that is individually associated with a person. And it can include the really toxic elements like social security numbers and credit card numbers as well. There's also HIPAA records. These are very specific things related to healthcare, and it needs to come basically from a covered entity like a hospital or medical center or a business associate that they do business with. That is contrasted a little bit with general health data, which is everything else. It can be very similar information, but since it's not tied to a covered entity hospital care environment, it really is a separate classification. We want to protect both, but HIPAA is really the most important to protect because there are significant penalties if that data is compromised. And specifically with HIPAA, we will need a business associates agreement if we enter into a HIPAA agreement with any third party. We're a university, so we have a lot of student data, and we want to have that as a checkbox as well, whether or not it is FERPA or not, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Payment card data is the credit card processing or credit card payment environment. This area is really tightly regulated and applies to any credit card processing, whether UCI is doing it or whether the third party is doing it. So we really need to be aware if any of that is coming into scope of the agreement. GDPR is basically protecting PII of European residents, and there are two major categories of that data from just the general personal data elements. And there's an item called special data, which really gets into some very specific fields that are considered particularly toxic in GDPR. And you would also need the GDPR appendix if you are sharing any of this data with a third party. The rest of the items are research data elements. So you really need to work with your faculty members because they will be aware if any of their research or data is covered by any of these entities. Definitely work with faculty members because they are going to be the ones who know if any of these data is present. Exhibit 3 is the contracts and regulations that apply to the data types that we just described. And again, there are a couple different sections here. There's a privacy set of laws and regulations and a security set of laws and regulations. And some of these will apply in different cases or not. So the common laws and regulations that we deal with, number one is the California Information Practices Act. And this has been around since 1977, and there's a constitutional requirement in California that the state is required to protect any data that it collects about individuals, and that includes UC since we're a government entity. So it has a lot of requirements for how personal information is collected and managed, and it was recently updated in 2003 to include requirements for notification if certain data elements are breached. So this really is the bread and butter of pretty much any data that we collect and share. So this box will almost always be checked on anything that we share with a third party. There's also the Consumer Privacy Act, which is a relatively new item. UC is not directly beholden to that, but suppliers that we do business with may be required to follow CCPA, so you might need to inform them of that. FERPA is, again, the federal regulation that surrounds student records, and it only technically applies to data that's considered officially part of the student record. We still want to protect student data as much as possible, but FERPA only applies to official student records. And interestingly, if their students go to the Student Health Center, their medical information is covered under FERPA instead of HIPAA, so just be aware of that. The European GDPR, we've talked about that in a little bit, but that's the general regulation to protect European resident information, and again, the GDPR appendix is required for that. HIPAA High Tech is the PHI that we talked about with the HIPAA security rules. One of the things that makes this different is it really needs to have a review by the UC Health people. So campus security is not really aware of some of the ins and outs of HIPAA, so that really needs to be reviewed by UC Health at the moment. The California Confidentiality of Medical Information Act is basically the California version of HIPAA, so those will almost always be checked together. I'll skip over the substance abuse one since that's kind of a marginal one, but the payment card industry is, again, all of the credit card processing. So if anything is being done with credit cards, this box needs to be checked. And Gramm-Leach-Bliley is basically protecting the privacy of student financial aid information. And at some point that also may be subject to the NIST 800-171 requirements, which is any data that we get from the federal government. There are a bunch of other regulations in that section as well, and most of these will correspond to the similar data types, like in the research areas for the DARs and DFARs and things like that. So work with your faculty members to determine if any of that data is present and any of these regulations apply. So part of our challenge with Appendix DS is negotiating terms can be lengthy. Large companies, the Googles, Microsofts of the world simply won't negotiate Appendix DS. They have their own terms and agreements, and they're big enough that they can tell us to take it or leave it. So often large companies won't negotiate at all. Smaller suppliers, especially smaller value contracts, they don't want to negotiate either. It's just not economically worth it to them to negotiate a complex requirement for a few $1,000s. Also, be wary of suppliers who accept terms too quickly, because sometimes I've found with suppliers, they just want to get the business and they'll sign any piece of paper and really don't understand the requirements of Appendix DS and what they really need to do to protect their data. We also see wide levels of security maturity amongst suppliers. So many smaller or mid-sized companies just simply don't have formal security plans that they can give us, and almost certainly don't have their security plans audited to the standard that we want to see. So it's been pretty challenging to actually try to get good information from some of these companies. There's a tool called the HECVAT, which can sometimes help close the gap if they don't have a security plan, but we try to get as much information to be able to make a good judgment on what kind of security terms the supplier may have. When we do a risk assessment, as we mentioned earlier, the depth of that assessment really will depend on the protection levels and the laws and regulations that apply to the data, how complete a supplier security plan is, how their audit looks like, what the HECVAT looks like. And if there are any significant gaps, either in the security plan or with Appendix DS, we need to go through a security exception process to make sure the unit is really aware of these gaps and can accept risk or find another supplier that has better security terms. We're really trying to improve the Appendix DS process. We're finding that one size really doesn't fit all very well. It's, you know, a single document, and it really is pretty heavy in the negotiation process. So we're trying to find ways where to accommodate smaller suppliers that don't have, you know, good security plans, don't maybe do background checks, may not have the levels of cyber insurance that we're looking for, and really take a look and see if we can come up with some way to assess those groups a little better, especially in low risk cases. So what we're looking at for future plans is we're trying to develop an Appendix DS Lite for low risk use cases with fewer and more simplified questions. We want to develop some risk treatment plans, so if a supplier doesn't have a security plan, they can fill out a risk treatment plan and we can get an idea of what their security maturity is. We also want to delegate some authority to the campus UISL, so we'll be providing some training and we'll encourage them to do some of the low risk assessments in the units so they don't have to bubble up to security and potentially be part of that. And then we're also looking at purchasing a governance risk and compliance tool, a GRC tool, to help streamline supplier risk assessments and have better documentation. I'll just finalize here with this chart of improving Appendix DS. So we're trying to find good ways of communicating to the campus as far as what contracts may be exempt, what may be a light review, what requires a full review, and then the most toxic areas like HIPAA or PCI that might have additional requirements beyond Appendix DS. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Hello, my name is April Sather. I am UCI's Assistant Chief Information Security Officer and am presenting these slides on behalf of UCI's Privacy Office. In this segment, we will talk about supplier privacy reviews, specifically privacy reviews that are associated with the procurement of software solutions here at UCI. Learning objectives. First, we'll cover what is privacy, followed by when is a privacy review needed when procuring software? What are some of the common questions to ask suppliers? What are some privacy red flags to be aware of? And finally, where do you direct questions about privacy? UCI respects the privacy of individuals, and privacy, of course, plays an important role in human dignity and is necessary for an ethical and respectful workplace. There are two key privacy principles to keep in mind: autonomy privacy and information privacy. Autonomy privacy is an individual's ability to conduct activities without concern of or actual observation. And then there's information privacy. This is the appropriate protection, use, and release of information about individuals. When it comes to software, both principles may come into play. Each year, hundreds of software applications are purchased or renewed at UCI. UCI has a duty to protect individual privacy and to safeguard the information in our care. From a $50 PAL card purchase to a multi-million-dollar enterprise application suite, it is important to pause, to consider privacy when the application involves working with individually identifiable information. There are 3 points where a privacy review may come into play. First, and most commonly, a review may take place during the evaluation and purchase of new software. The second opportunity for a privacy review can be at the point of renewal. Old agreements often contain outdated terms, and renewals are a great time to ensure that we update them to include the latest addendums and terms. The third opportunity is when a new use is envisioned for an existing software application. Software that is deemed suitable for one type of information may not be appropriate for another, or may require additional privacy protections to be enabled through configuration, business process, or contract. So, how do you know if the software you are procuring may need a privacy review? Our updated software questionnaire guides requesters through the process. This slide shows an example of information with potential privacy considerations. These are all examples of areas where an individual would have a reasonable expectation of privacy when it comes to their personal information. Taking a few minutes to complete this questionnaire at the beginning of the process can help prevent a software purchase from being slowed down by an unforeseen privacy consideration later on. Depending on the answers to these questions, your application will automatically be routed to privacy for review as part of the overall software procurement process. Or, if you would like to reach out to privacy directly with specific questions, that is another option. Contact information is provided at the end of this presentation for the UCI Privacy Office. There is a shared responsibility model when it comes to privacy during the software procurement process. UCI's responsibilities are listed on the left side of this slide, and the supplier's ability to help us meet those obligations appear on the right. UCI is obligated to protect privacy rights and comply with applicable laws. Knowing which laws apply can be a challenge itself, which is another reason that we have added more specific questions to the software procurement questionnaire mentioned earlier in this presentation. Data classification is where it all starts. At UCI, this means understanding the data that will be processed, stored, or transmitted by the application, as well as its protection level, P1 through P4. For more information about protection levels, please visit security.uci.edu. Privacy by design includes the principle of embedding privacy into the design of the software application. This includes strong privacy default settings, appropriate notice, and overall user centricity, all while not sacrificing security. Data minimization simply means that an application should only collect and use as much data as required to successfully accomplish the desired task. And finally, risk reduction. An example of risk reduction includes the privacy review itself. A privacy review involves a thoughtful examination of administrative controls and supplier practices. This includes examining documentation provided by the supplier, and in some cases, reaching out to the supplier directly to answer the following questions. Did we make it clear that UCI owns the institutional information and that we intend to keep ownership of it? Can the supplier show us who will see, access, and use our institutional information? Can we limit their access to the minimum necessary to complete the task? Does the supplier's practice match our standards when it comes to privacy? Where do they keep the institutional information? For how long? Do they use this information for their own operations? And finally, and perhaps most importantly, how prepared is the supplier to detect, correct, and notify us of privacy lapses? There are a few privacy red flags that we wanted to draw your attention to. First, suppliers who want to sell our information to others. Resistance to breach notification requirements. Sellers who don't have a privacy statement or policy, for example, on their website. And agreements that exempt suppliers from all liability. These are all privacy red flags that we look for during the privacy review. We hope that you found this brief overview of privacy reviews during the software procurement process helpful. If you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at privacy@uci.edu or directly. Thank you.
Hi there, my name is Meredith Ehrenberg. I'm an information architect with the Office of Information Technology, and I co-chair the IT Accessibility Work Group here on campus. So let's talk about digital accessibility for a moment and why it's so important to make sure all the software we purchase for the university can be used by everyone, which is really what accessibility means. The image on this slide is of a bunch of school kids waiting on a snowy day outside their elementary school. The custodian is clearing their steps with a snow shovel. A student who uses a wheelchair asks the custodian to clear the ramp instead, and the custodian replies, "But all the other kids are waiting to use the stairs. When I get through shoveling them off, I'll come clear the ramp for you." The student in the wheelchair replies, "But if you clear the ramp, we can all get in." This is how we need to be thinking about our software purchases, ensuring that we've cleared the way for as many people as possible to have access. So you may be thinking, but my team that will use this software doesn't have any disabilities, so I don't need to worry about this. Well, let's talk about your definition of disability in that assumption. Remember that not every disability is permanent. Take a look at these examples of temporary or situational disadvantages that some people might encounter. For example, someone who today can operate a mouse just fine might tomorrow break their arm or wrist, making a keyboard the only way to access the software. Someone who today can see everything on a monitor may down the road have an eye infection or other eye injury. This is where screen reader software comes in, reading all the contents of a page aloud to the user. It's so critical that the software you're buying is compatible with screen readers. Of course, this holds true for other senses as well. Someone you may think has perfect hearing may get an ear infection, or may simply be in a noisy room, like an airport. Or maybe they need to keep quiet, like in a library. This is why captions for audio are so important. And don't forget that not all disabilities are visible. For example, a whole slew of cognitive disabilities may make some things problematic, like flashing content, filling out forms, and completing timed actions within a certain window. It's also hard for some people to determine focus, where the cursor or pointer is on the page, especially when the software is giving an error, like when a pop-up box opens or the software moves you back to a previous form field to tell you have an error. So yes, it's the right thing to do, but if that doesn't convince you, it's also the law and UC policy. UCI uses a distributed delegation of authority for vetting accessibility and security for purchases. That means each software purchaser is responsible for ensuring that their purchases meet UC security and accessibility policies. If a purchased product or service turns out to have a significant accessibility flaw, some members of our faculty, staff, student body, or maybe even the public might find the product or service difficult or even impossible to use. Such a situation exposes the university to risk, increases costs, and undermines the university's commitment to diversity and inclusion. Our goal is to help you understand and assess the risk you may be assuming with a planned purchase. So we recommend you complete the questionnaire early on in the consideration phase for any new purchases. It's just 3 questions and helps you consider how the software will be used and whether the purchase is high risk. As you answer each question, you'll be guided whether to stop or continue by answering the next question. For low-risk purchases, like an additional license of software already widely used on campus, think Microsoft Office, Adobe Creative Cloud, etc., you'll answer the questions and not have to do anything else. But if the software will be used by people outside your unit, for example, students or the general public, and there's no other way to complete the task than by using the software, that's a much higher risk purchase, and you should ask for a deeper review by our team. If your questionnaire reveals that you need an accessibility review, submit it to the email address on the form. That will create an incident in ServiceNow, so both sides can track the progress of the review throughout. We'll then reach out to the vendor to determine how well they conform to the mandated guidelines. Based on their response and any identified weaknesses, we'll reach back out to you to discuss the risk and whether you want to proceed with the purchase. If you do, we may recommend that you create an accommodation plan, what you will do if someone says they can't use the software. Will you, for example, have someone else do the task for them, either temporarily or permanently? That might work in a small team, but wouldn't work for a whole class of students. And it might bring back some of the issues we've already talked about in the privacy setting. You wouldn't want someone to have to reveal personal information for you to input when they should be able to do that for themselves. A classic example of this is an ATM. Someone who can't see the screen shouldn't have to give you their card and reveal their PIN number for you to enter on their behalf. This is why identifying the risk upfront and making informed purchasing decisions is so important. We're here as a resource and look forward to working with you to ensure we're all doing the right thing when it comes to making accessible software purchases. Thank you.
Thank you to our presenters. We will now go over some frequently asked questions. Our first question is, where do I find the software procurement page and questionnaire? So on the procurement services website, there is a drop down from the procurement tab at the top as highlighted on your screen. Please click on buying goods to open that page and scroll over to the software icon on the right. From there, you'll be able to get to the software procurement page where you'll also find the questionnaire icon right in the middle there. Also on this page, you will find the recorded video of our presentation, along with the slides and any additional FAQs. Another question is, where do I find a list of existing software procurement agreements? As April mentioned, we will have this list available for you later this year. Until then, first check with your unit procurement point of contact, then perform a vendor search in KFS for previous software purchase orders. If you still have any questions, please contact procurement services at procurement.uci.edu. Our next question is, where do I find the information to help me determine whether to make a software purchase via PAL card or requisition? So requesters should always start with your unit procurement point of contact. If you are the unit procurement point of contact, you must evaluate these purchases on a case-by-case basis. Sometimes even a low-value purchase can be harmful depending on the type of information that the supplier will have access to or what we plan on sharing with the supplier, as well as how the supplier will store that information. Again, if you have any questions, please contact procurement services for additional guidance. Our next question is, where do I find the Appendix DS and related documents mentioned today? You can find these on UCOP's Procurement Services website under Forms and Policies. Another important question is, where do I find the classification levels workshop mentioned today? You can find the video and PDF presentation of this workshop on the Procurement Services software procurement page referenced earlier. And our last question is, where do I find the help on the software procurement process? So please start with your unit procurement point of contact. And if you have any additional questions, please refer to the additional units listed on this page. We will now begin our Q&A portion of the presentation. Please raise your hand or type in your question in the Q&A box. So we have one Q&A. This presentation will be available on demand on the software procurement page on the Procurement Services website. Please give us about 3 to 5 days to get everything uploaded, and we will send you guys an email update on when everything's up. Matt had a question. If I'm buying software that deals with student data via the Canvas Learning Management System administered by OIT, do I still need to go through my unit's UISL? Who can answer that for us from our panel?
April, you want to take that?
Oh, April, we have you still on mute. Sorry about that.
Thank you. So I know that some of the OIT teams have existing processes that are in place, for example, academic web technologies and others. So if something is working well there, that is fine. There's no need to make a change. The areas that we're really encouraging a deeper relationship with the unit information security leads are particularly in the schools. One of the things we encounter is a very high volume of security reviews. So what we're looking to do is build a little bit more autonomy and ability for units to take some of this on themselves. But in the meantime, the first point of contact with any questions, if your unit information security lead is not available, can be the security risk and compliance team, which is security reviews at uci.edu. Student data is really important. We have FERPA regulations in some cases, and there's a lot to keep in mind there. I'm going to hand it over to John to maybe add a little bit more to my answer.
No, I think you nailed it. So, I mean, there's a certain amount of governance maybe that needs to be worked out between the registrar and the OIT teams that were running the infrastructure. But at this point, I think we can just work it out within OIT and develop some formal guidance as we go.
Do we have any additional questions? Okay, if you do have any additional questions, please feel free to, oh, I see one more from Irene. Is the purchase a renewal? Will the purchaser need to complete the questionnaire each year? I'm guessing if the purchase is a renewal, will the purchaser need to complete the questionnaire each year? And April will answer that.
Once she unmutes, you're going to unmute April.
That's twice in a row. Thank you. So the reason we encourage this practice is because sometimes the use case has changed, and actually in many cases, software as a service, the applications change. Private equity companies are sweeping up these SaaS vendors, very quickly. And so all of a sudden what you thought was a company with certain practices becomes a company that's quite different. And that might be not only in the security space, but in the privacy as well. Yes, we do like to do it the renewal. The good news about renewals is it's usually quite a bit faster if we've gone through the process the first time, because we're really just looking to close the gap over the past year. So hopefully that helps a little bit answer the question.
So April, I guess when they're doing the renewal, should they just fill out the questionnaire and see if there are any changes to that or to the case, use case, or the?
I think yes. If the questionnaire is a great place to start, and we are gradually moving towards the Appendix DS. If the application is on the approved software list, all you need is the questionnaire, because we've already gone through it. We have a good course. We might independently reach out and do an update, but we're trying to make sure to right size the process and reward people for going through it. And at the end of the day, but we don't want to be too quick and overlook something that might have changed behind the scenes.
Thank you.
And we had another question come in. How do we find out who the unit procurement point of contact is? Snehal, can you cover that one for us, please?
Yeah, so as you had seen in the presentation that Patrick had, there are designated unit information security leads that have been identified. Actually, April and her team are in the process of providing them with education and training on how they can become subject matter experts. But that also is available on the OIT's website, where they can go in and identify who they are. And I believe our presentation does have a link to the list of unit information security leads. Is that correct, April?
Yes, but I believe the question was for the unit procurement point of contact that they were looking for.
Oh, my apologies. I thought it was unit information. Okay, so the unit point of procurement point of contact is typically your buyers who are making the purchases for the units. Of course, many of the departments have, or the schools have, a purchasing department where they have a purchasing manager and a few buyers. But in most cases, you should have what we call a contracts manager, who's helping either process something through a PAL card or using or generating a requisition in KFS. So those are the people who would be your purchasing point of contact for the individual units. I hope that answers your question, Heather.
And then again, just an FYI, the slides that we did present are going to be available on our website. So you will be able to locate your unit procurement point of contact from there as well. Do we have any other questions today? Okay, so I'm going to hand it back to Snehal and April. Thank you, everyone.
And thank you. I just wanted to close by thanking all of you for spending this time with us today. I think, the most important thing I'd like to leave us with as far as a thought is For the new process to be successful, it requires all of you and all of us working together. And I think one of the things we'd like to leave you with as well is that the hope of having this campus-facing inventory of approved software is something that we're really giving back and making an increased transparency of the process, and again, saving you time at every opportunity. Snehal, any last words?
I would like to reiterate what April said. We definitely want to thank you all for taking time from your busy schedules to be here today, this afternoon, and listen into this presentation. Hope you found it useful and meaningful. Hope you learned a little bit of what all goes into procuring a software, which I think is more important than anything is for you to have a good feel for what is it that why is it taking so long? So that's the general complaint we get from everybody. It's like, it takes forever for us to get anything going through, but hopefully now you have a better feel for why it takes longer than usual. Not going to defend the fact that we had some personnel changes on our teams that has contributed to the delays in getting things through. But as you can tell, we are committed to making necessary improvements to streamline our processes, work collaboratively across all the different parties that are engaged in procuring any software. And as you saw, it's not as straightforward and simple as one may think. So with this knowledge, actually, we would like you to take this information you have learned today, share it with your PIs and your faculty and your staff, and make them understand whenever they have a need that we do have to go through some of this, fill the questionnaire out, help them understand the value of the questionnaire to make sure that it's done correctly. And after that, we can take it from there and have the necessary parties review either privacy needs or accessibility or the security. So again, we want to thank you. Hopefully it was beneficial and useful for you, and it was time well spent. Okay, and have a good rest of that day, and stay safe.